Very special thanks, of course, to Affordable Prestige Cars. Any who follow Beards and Cars will know, of course, I've worked with these folks plenty of times, and this is a very special occasion for me because I finally got to drive my particular favourite version of my favourite Aston, the Rapide. And if you're watching this video close enough to the time of release, then this exact car is for sale. So if you are looking for a Rapide, or perhaps something like it, then of course you can jump over to their website and check out their current stock by clicking the link right below in the description. As I've said numerous times here on the channel, this is my favourite Aston, and ever since I reviewed the S version, this was the one I wanted to get my hands on, the original 470 horsepower Aston Martin Rapide. Why this one though? Why the least powerful, technically, out of the three? If you compare this to the S and the AMR Pro, why would you like the slowest one the most? Well, to me that happens quite a lot. Many of my favourite cars tend to be the original versions because to me they have a purity, a simplicity. You can see the car at its core of what it offers, and then everything later on is just a nice addition, if you will. And of course when it comes to buying one, those additions do tend to hike up the price. So in the case of these, it does make them that much more affordable, quote unquote, and certainly that much better value for money, more crucially, in comparison to something like the much more expensive AMR Pro version. This one is a 470 horsepower, of course, still 6-litre V12, and it is essentially a stretched 4-door DB9, which is funny because I love the Rapide, but I've never been a DB9 guy. I'm yet to review one on the channel, so I could be changed, but it just never quite did it for me in the way that some other Astons do. There's a two-part question that has to be answered. Does it, first of all, live up to what I was hoping it would be? And perhaps more importantly, how does it compare to that S version? Should you buy this over the S, or is the S worth the extra money? Well, let's talk about downsides first, because downsides on the Rapide are a very easy thing to discuss in my opinion, because its single biggest strength is also its single biggest downside, and that is simply put, it's a supercar. It is literally a 4-door supercar, to a degree that even the Panamera, even the Quattroporte are not. They are supercars, certainly, and they deserve to be rivals, but they are not as much of a pure 4-door supercar as this is. Especially, and here's the key, when it comes to its design. This car is unflinching in keeping its beauty from the DB9 shape. They would not concede any ground in terms of making it more practical than it absolutely has to be to retain that supercar shape. You physically cannot make a car as sleek as this without sacrificing space somewhere else, which means two things in practice for the Rapide. One, it's very clearly intended to have fitted luggage because the boot is quite a strange shape, almost like a step system. You can of course fold down the back seats and have more, but as is, you'll probably have those up most of the time. And the second thing, and this is immediately apparent, especially for rear passengers, and again, I talked about it before, that huge center console running down the middle of the car for the transmission tunnel and the electricals. Unless it's an electric car, you can't really get rid of a tunnel like that on something as low and as sleek as a Rapide. So as I said, you have to make sacrifices to have this kind of beauty. It's down to each individual person, driver, potential buyer, if it's worth that sacrifice to you. Because to me, the Rapide, especially compared to its two closest rivals from Porsche and Maserati, you should buy this car if you specifically want this car. Don't buy it because it is or isn't better than a Panamera or a Quattroporte. As I said in my showdown between all three, each of those three cars have distinct and very large advantages and disadvantages over each other. The Rapide, though, is the one out of the three that you should buy with your heart completely. Your head does not matter when it comes to this car. It has enough space to be practical enough for 99% of what you'll need. Even the awkwardly shaped boot is still a decent size for a supercar. Its fuel economy, although of course it can be thirsty if you have a heavy foot, it's a 6-litre V12 in a very large limo at the end of the day, so of course it's going to be, but it's not as bad as you might think if you drive it in the way that I believe Aston Martin intended. And that, especially for those who haven't driven a Rapide yet, is the really interesting thing, because you don't expect it to drive as it does. At least I didn't when I drove the S version, and this feels exactly the same in this one specific way. This does not handle or perform or feel like a supercar, which seems to run counter to what I said just now. It looks like one, it sounds like one, it has the kind of fit and finish and beautiful interior design, etc. Certainly the road presence, the badge panache, it ticks every single supercar box, but it actually performs and feels more like what you'd expect from a Bentley or a Rolls-Royce, which means that yet again, if performance is all you care about, well, maybe get something like the S, or to be honest, the S is quicker but not quicker enough to really satiate that desire, so I'd say just go all the way to an AMR Pro if you can afford it and really want to represent Aston Martin, or for a similar price, just get a Panamera Turbo. That's an absolute space shuttle with a steering wheel. Then the Maserati. Well, the Maserati is about the same as this, and sometimes you can get them for a little bit less on cash. So again, if you really care about performance, the Aston isn't necessarily the clear winner. What it's about is the way it makes you feel. And funnily enough, that's actually a very Maserati approach. It's a distinctly Italian vibe from a distinctly British car. It has incredible presence on the road, but it's also comfortable. The space, although I wouldn't say it's cramped by any stretch, even as a bigger driver or a bigger passenger, you can fit in it well enough, but it feels more snug. It's more focused. Everything directs your attention forward, down to almost a pinhead-sized point in the near distance. Everything about the car almost seems like it's shaped that way. It's all pointing forward. The whole design, the curve of its roof, the curve of the bonnet, the kind of narrow, focused, almost blinkered approach that every window gives it. Every bit of your attention is being focused forward, ahead. And that's actually quite a distinct feel in a car like this. There are very few four-door cars that feel the way that this does in terms of the visual meal that you can enjoy, let's put it that way, when you're sitting in one. And likewise, again, the S has that as well, but to me, the reason why this makes the S version less needed, unless you really want the S version, is because this can do 9/10 of what the S can do, and in practice, you're not really going to be using that extra power that often, are we? For many of us at least. It has the great looks, of course that's a personal preference thing, and crucially it is that much better on price. These before had a huge disadvantage over the Maseratis and the Porsches, which was that they were pretty much 50 grand or more minimum, whereas the Maseratis you could get for 30 in some cases, Porsches as low as 20 for super high mileage, more like 30 to 40 really, so the Aston just wasn't quite close enough to be a clear-cut choice. Now, well, this one's less than 40, and it's for sale now, as I said. You can get some for less than 30, although I wouldn't necessarily recommend risking that. The long and the short of that is, though, that now that prices are so close to its nearest natural rivals, this is becoming more and more of a tempting choice. To me, this is my favourite of the three, even though it's not necessarily the best of the three in every way. There are some ways in which it definitely is, like the looks and the sound, but it's a car that, as I said, is not really about just ticking academic boxes. This is not a Porsche at the end of the day, and if that's what you like, then the Porsche is probably for you. But the Porsche doesn't look anywhere near as good, doesn't sound anywhere near as good, and it certainly doesn't make you feel like driving this car does. To me, the Rapide almost feels like what you might get if you asked Rolls-Royce to make a supercar, but still with four doors. And even though they've kind of done that since then with stuff like the Wraith, this, I don't know, it just has that kind of feel to me. It's not a car that was intended to be thrown around. It has tremendous performance when you want it, and it certainly looks and sounds the part, as I've said numerous times, so it can do those things, but it's more at home, being a long-distance cruiser, the kind of car that you show up to an event in, the kind of car that makes everywhere feel like you're going to an event. Now, it is possible that for some potential buyers you may want the extra horsepower, but it's not, to me, enough of a difference to really make it a night and day clear-cut answer. This one with 470 horsepower is already, to me, as fast as it needs to be. The 0 to 60 is already around the 5-second range, the top speed is already fantastic, and where most of the time are you ever going to use it anyway, the things that it needs, it already has, which are the stunning looks, the gorgeous soundtrack, the beautiful interior, and enough practicality for it to be a supercar that you can use as often as you want to. The only downsides to it are the ones that I already mentioned, which are from that supercar design. So for me, especially now that I've driven this version and the S version, the answer as to whether or not you should buy a Rapide is pretty clear-cut. It's actually a lot simpler than it could be. Yes, if you want a Rapide, buy one, because anything that could be a potential downside, you probably already don't care too much because if you did care, you probably wouldn't be looking to buy an Aston. You'd get something that's either bigger or just more of a quote-unquote normal approach. The Porsche, as fantastic as it is, feels a bit more like a normal car and less of a supercar. It has the performance of one for sure and definitely more space, but it doesn't quite have that exotic look, feel and vibe that an Aston Martin has. The Maserati, well, the Maserati definitely has the historical exotica, it has the motorsport history. Of course, they sound fantastic, they look lovely, they're very rare, much like the Aston, and they are, in some cases, significantly more affordable. But as somebody who, of course, has owned 3 Quattroportes at this point, well, I don't own them anymore. So as much as I love them, I do still move on. And I'm sure ultimately I would with the Rapide as well, because I always like to try new things, but I feel like the Rapide is kind of the top of the tree when it comes to this sort of stuff. Even if you fast forward to today, many years after these came out, for me and for my money, there's not really any other car that has surpassed the Rapide yet in terms of being a pure 4-door supercar. There are some great ones for sure, and there are plenty of super saloons, there always have been, but not that has this level, this caliber of supercar prestige to it. If you consider their prices to now be in the range that you would be comfortable with, in the case of this one, 40,000 or so, in the case of some, maybe 50,000, perhaps a bit more for an S, certainly a lot more for an AMR Pro, depending on how quick you want the car to be, I would say that now is probably one of the best times for getting a Rapide. And the reason why I'd say now is because of a few factors. One, as I already alluded to, they finally come down to a point where they are genuinely rivaling Porsche and Maserati. The second issue is obviously the double-edged sword of more affordable prices, which is that the more times an Aston Martin changes hands, the higher the mileage is going to get, the more owners you have, the less consistency there will be in terms of knowing that the car has been taken care of. So now is a sweet spot to get in early on these good prices rather than waiting for them to potentially be abused or not taken care of in some cases. And again, for the sub £30,000 region, there are probably a few of those. The third thing is because actually I think we're kind of in a curve. We're at the low point of the curve on price, but Aston didn't sell too many of these, even in comparison to their other vehicles, and that is a good thing in the long run, because it means that as people realise, much like the Lexus LFA, various other cars that were not fully appreciated when they first came out, those values will increase over time as people start to miss this kind of purity. It's crazy that a car this modern can already somehow feel classic in terms of being a completely unapologetic 6-litre non-hybrid petrol V12. It's a naturally aspirated, brute supercar of an engine in a stunning shape, doesn't care about the environment, doesn't care about electricals. It's a genuine proper 4-door supercar. That is going away, and to some degree it already has. And as people start to miss that more and more, prices are going to go up because the demand is going to go up. And of course, when it's already a rare car to begin with, the supply is not exactly there already, so it will go down even more. So supply and demand, the age-old thing, these will go up. They will become, in my opinion, a very collectible and very highly sought after Aston. And if you want more evidence of that being borne out by history, well, just consider another one of my favourite Astons, the very controversial Lagonda. For a while, people didn't want one. Nowadays, you're looking at 6 figures easy for a Lagonda. It's not a particularly quick car, there's no real reason to buy it other than you just want one, and yet look at their prices. The Rapide has the 4-door Aston factor, but it's also a stunning car which does tick all the boxes of what you would want, and crucially, why you should want one. So to me, it is going to go up. They're probably about as good as they're going to be now, and, well, yeah, I mean, it's an Aston Martin Rapide for around £40,000. Why wouldn't you want one? Now that I have finally driven my favourite version, is it still my favourite? Absolutely. I would buy this over the S version in a heartbeat, and I'm speaking purely for myself there. I don't like the look of the S as much. I don't need extra horsepower. The difference in performance is next to useless in my daily driving. This is more of a cruiser, has more elegance, and to me that is exactly what I want from the car. I like having the supercar ability when you want it, but I don't need it all the time. Being more of an elegant cruiser is what this does best. So ultimately that's it for my thoughts on the Rapide. I would love to hear the thoughts of maybe those who've had a Rapide in the past, maybe you still do. There were some great comments and of course some love shown for sure on the Rapide S as well. So if you may be torn between them, check out that review. And of course it would be interesting to compare my older thoughts then to these thoughts now. Of course, check out more reviews in Beards and Cars if you are so inclined, and I'll see you next time. But for now, thanks for watching.